Sometimes being a person of faith is really hard. Not all the time, but sometimes. And if we're honest, it would be a lot easier if we could just keep our faith in a little box, haul it out on Sunday mornings if we have time, if we had an extra hour of sleep or something, and then put it away again nice and neatly when we're done, ready to move on with our week, ready to attend to our jobs, our relationships, our classrooms, our civic responsibilities. After all, what good would our faith do us there? And yet, if we never carry our faith with us into Monday morning or Tuesday morning or the rest of the week, what's the point? After all, our faith calls us to live differently, not just on Sunday mornings, but the rest of the week, to live differently, to act differently, to vote differently, and we ignore it at our own peril. Not that God would punish us if we turn away. That's not who God is. Rather, we end up punishing ourselves. If nothing else, the last 4 years have taught us that, haven't they? Of what happens when we leave our faith at Sunday morning. It allows us to justify any number of sins. We tell ourselves, well, my 401k is growing, my accounts are doing well, all so that we can pretend that we don't see the truth. That at some point, consciously or not, we sold our birthright for a mess of pottage. After all, friends, what good are growing accounts if we've bankrupted our soul in the process? Or as Jesus put it, what does it profit one to gain the world, but to lose their soul? I've received so many calls and emails this week asking me to do different things. Some have begged me to stay silent, and some have begged me to speak up, but all seem to have recognized the weight of this particular moment in time. And if I'm honest, I've dreaded this sermon for months, not because I don't trust the nudging of the Holy Spirit, but because I recognize the consequences of following it. Sometimes being a person of faith is really hard. To be clear, I have no desire to be political, whatever that means. I long to be faithful. With every fiber of my being, I long to be faithful. Because you see, as hard as it is to believe and as imperfectly as I practice it, I actually believe what I preach here on Sunday mornings. I believe that love leads to life. I believe that the grace of God is for all. I believe that all of us are children of the same God, young and old, black and white, gay and straight, male and female, rich and poor, broken and whole, Republican and Democrat, and everyone beyond and between. I believe that everyone's voice deserves to be heard, that kindness matters, that none of us face this life alone. I believe that the hope of Jesus Christ offers something to this world, that he showed us the way to life, which, as it turns out, had nothing to do with dogma or doctrine, but was fully wrapped up in how we treat one another, in how we love. Do you see? Call me naive, but I believe these things. Which means that when I see them being trampled upon, I have a responsibility to speak up, a responsibility laid upon me not at my ordination, but at my baptism. It's not rocket science, friends. We learn it in kindergarten, we teach it in our Sunday school, I preach it every Sunday from this pulpit. How we treat each other matters. In some ways, it's all that matters. As Christians, we're not called to tear down, we're called to build up. We're not called to push away, but to bring together, not called to build walls, but bridges, to make more room at the table, not less. Only for 4 years we seem to have forgotten that. Some parents out there will know what it's like to try and teach your kids that truth matters, only to have the President of the United States daily ignore it. To teach your kids that kindness matters, only to have the President of the United States daily ignore it. To teach your kids that our diversity makes us stronger, only to have the President of the United States daily ignore it. This election is different, friends. We've said it so many times that it has become a kind of platitude. It has become cliche, but it also happens to be true. This one's not about being Republican or Democrat. As we know from our own congregation, from our own lives, from our own experience, there are good people in both parties. Something that our black and white binary world seems to forget. And there are honest, earnest conversations we ought to be having about the role of government, about market regulation, about border control, even about when life itself begins. But make no mistake, that is not what this election is about. This one's about who we are and who we long to be as a nation. Are we a place where the truth still matters? Are we a place where kindness counts? Are we a place that is willing to live up to those most fundamental ideals of our democracy, where all are equal in God's sight? As Christians, the answer has to be yes. To be clear, there will always be leaders who fall short, those who never live up to the ideals that are put before them, myself included. None of us is perfect. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God, but friends, trying matters. At least it used to. Look at what has become of us in the last 4 years. Yes, it had been coming on for some time, but we have cranked it up to 11. No longer can we speak to our neighbors, to our friends, to our families. No longer can we listen to reason or reach across the aisles. We can't even trust basic facts at this point, which meant, of course, that when real calamity struck, we were not able to meet it. When a virus came that paid no attention to party affiliation, we couldn't fathom what it might mean to address it together. And because of the failed leadership that has politicized a pandemic, more people than were necessary or needed to have paid the price with their lives. Who do we want to be? Who do we choose to be our leader? Who will you choose? Not who will you choose on Tuesday in the booth, but who will you choose today in your heart? In our lesson for today, Jesus warns against failed leadership, and Matthew tells us who our leader has to be, our fundamental leader, the only leader that counts. Jesus speaks about the seat of Moses, a position the details of which have been lost to history, but which we might imagine is someone who sat at a particular place in the temple and shared the law of Moses. And Jesus said, "Do as they say, but not as they do." Matthew had already seen the hypocrisy, what would become of those temple elites who put themselves above everyone else. Writing 50 years after Jesus, he had already seen the temple destroyed. In other words, he'd already seen what would become of those who longed to have the best places at the banquet hall, to be cheered by adoring crowds, to have people cry out when they see him, "Rabbi." or as literally translated in our passage, my great one. He also knew who we are called to have lead us. All that glitters is not gold. And he reminded his readers, and in turn us, that in the end they have but one teacher, one leader, one Lord, the Lord of love, the once and future King. What was his name again? As it turns out, if we want to follow that king, that leader, that King of Kings, we have to do so with humility, by never putting ourselves above everyone else, which ought to be a warning to us about our own leaders today. If the people we try to follow think that they are already the greatest there has ever been, it is a sign that they have already turned astray. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Friends, we have put up with a lot in the last 4 years and made a lot seem normal. But it's not. We have gotten used to the bullying and the lying and the self-congratulations. We've gotten used to the tearing down of anybody who thinks differently. We've even gotten used to those dog whistles towards white supremacists. But it is not normal, it is not right, and it is most certainly not Christian. There is more to being a Christian than tear-gassing our way to church and posing with a Bible for a picture. At some point, we have to open it up and go in those doors to see and hear and live what is being shared. This is a moment for Christians to respond. Yes, there are likely policy differences that we might be able to get on board with, but friends, is market deregulation worth our very souls? This is a moment for Christians to stand up, to speak out, to show the world what this faith actually means. For 80 years, the entire world has scratched their head and asked the question, where were the Christians in Germany in the 1930s? How was it that good people allowed such evil to grow? But the answer is, it didn't happen overnight. It started simply. Find someone to blame, push them to the margins, and then pretend as though they're not human. And like boiling a frog, by the time they noticed the change, the water was already too hot to escape. To be clear, this is not Nazi Germany. This is 2020 America, believe it or not. And where we go from here is up to us. It is time for people of faith to speak up, to lead with the truth, to speak in kindness, to not dehumanize the other, but to not hide from the truth, because in the end it is only the truth that will set us free. I have never in my entire ministry endorsed someone from a pulpit, and I will not do so today. Every person has to vote their conscience. My prayer is that every person will also vote their faith. My job, my entire job, is to help this congregation and this community understand what it means to be a Christian, to understand what it means to live as a disciple of Jesus Christ. I don't care if you are a Republican or a Democrat. I love you either way. What I care is if you are a Christian, which means that I cannot help but speak out. And in the end, I would rather lose my job than my soul. This is All Saints Sunday, a day in which we honor those who have come before us. But maybe it's also a moment when we also ought to begin thinking about our own legacy, about that moment that will inevitably come when it is our name being read out and that bell tolls for us. What is it that we want them to say? Who do we want to be? Now is our chance. We know the way. We have to follow it. Wherever you find yourself this morning, however you vote, you have a place here. Whether you find yourself nodding in agreement or shaking your fist, I am committed to being your pastor. In the end, my prayer is that I will continue to be faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ, to the call that God has placed on my life, so that someday, whenever it comes, and it is my name being read, and the bell is tolling for me, whatever else they might add, however imperfectly I might have done it, at least they could say, he tried to be faithful. Sometimes being a person of faith is really hard. My advice: remember who your true leader is. The same one this Sunday as last Sunday as will be next. Not me, not the governor, not the president, but the Lord of love, the once, and I pray future, King. May it be so. Amen.